These men work in one of the most hostile places on Earth. They risk their lives just getting there. Today, their worst fears come true. Their helicopter is plunging toward the frigid North Sea. They're far from land, off the radar screens. No one knows where they are.
Mayday, Mayday, 5-6 Charlie.
The next few seconds will decide who lives and who dies. The cause of the crash is hidden in its tangled wreck. These helicopters are built to handle the roughest conditions. What went wrong? The answer affects everyone who flies.
We're not getting any oxygen. We have the terrain alarm. Aero crew 603. We are in an emergency.
January 19th, 1995. Captain Ced Roberts and First Officer Lionel Sole work for Bristow Helicopters in Aberdeen, Scotland. Their job is to ferry workers out to the oil platforms off the coast of Scotland. By mid-morning, they've completed one trip and are getting ready to head back out. Their helicopter is Super Puma 5-6 Charlie. While it's being checked out and refueled, First Officer Sole reviews the flight logs, and Captain Roberts goes through the weather reports, which are updated every 2 hours.
Oh, weather's okay. Good for January.
This is where they're heading. The need for oil drives men to some of the most unpleasant places on Earth. This is one of them. The North Sea divides Britain from mainland Europe. It's a shallow sea, so the cruel winds that race across it can whip up enormous waves. The sea is cold, gray, and violent. But there's oil out here, and so dozens of drilling platforms and thousands of men stay and face whatever the weather can throw at them. The discovery of oil here in the 1960s was a lifesaver for the British economy. Brent crude, as the oil is known, is a light, sweet crude, ideal for turning into gasoline, and its price is the benchmark on the international oil market. It also turned Aberdeen, the Scottish port nearest the oil rigs, into a boomtown. It became the European oil capital. All the leading oil companies set up offices here. Everything became geared to the task of getting the black gold ashore. Today, Aberdeen can handle as many as 2 million workers every year, traveling back and forth to the rigs. The Super Pumas are the workhorses of the North Sea oil industry. There are more of the helicopters flying offshore here than anywhere else in the world. And it's the only place where they fly on such tight schedules.
Great Lord.
The passengers heading to the platforms today gather in the heliport's departure lounge. They all work for the Texas company Marathon Oil. The North Sea has been divided up into oil fields. The big companies have paid the British and Norwegian governments for licenses to drill in them. Marathon has bought licenses for 3 platforms in the Bray Field, East, Bravo, and Alpha. North Sea oil platforms are like cities that never sleep. They stand on the seabed, on huge metal or concrete legs, sometimes several hundred feet tall. Below each one, pipes snake out to around 30 different wells, some straight down, others fanning out at an angle for up to 8 kilometers. The same platform may be extracting both oil and natural gas at the same time. The work on a rig can be rough, dirty, and dangerous. 12-hour shifts handling heavy equipment, great heights or great depths. The turnover among workers is high. Having so much volatile fuel around means that danger is never far away.
Mayday! Explosion of fire on the Piper platform. All personnel abandoned.
One of Britain's worst disasters happened in the North Sea oil fields. On Occidental Petroleum's Piper Alpha platform in 1988, the gas exploded and set fire to oil. "167 men died. But disasters like that don't keep the workers away. On this January day, the men who work for Marathon Oil say their goodbyes. All 16 are scheduled to spend 2 weeks on Marathon's Alpha platform, followed by another 2 weeks back home. To these men, getting to work has become routine, a slightly unusual commute. But getting a ticket on this flight calls for something a little out of the ordinary. None of them are permitted to board a helicopter without first going through this: survival training. Their lives may depend on knowing how to get out of a submerged helicopter or oil rig. And they learn some of the brutal truths about survival in the North Sea. The natural human response to sudden immersion in cold water is to gasp, sucking in freezing water, which sends the windpipe into spasm, preventing air from getting in. People simply die from suffocation. Before they set off on every flight, they must watch the video. How to behave if there's an emergency on your flight. They've seen it all 1,000 times.
In an emergency, if time does not permit, just tighten your lap strap and brace for impact. To exit through the windows, pull the red tab to completely remove the rubber seal and push the window out.
The passengers fasten up their Gore-Tex survival suits, which give them some protection if they should end up in the water.
The forward windows.
The suits are brightly colored to help the men get spotted if their helicopter goes down. The journey to their oil platform, Bray Alpha, is 200 kilometers, which should take about an hour and a quarter. First, their flight path takes them northeast along what's called the HMR, the helicopter main route. Then, after 160 kilometers, they'll reach an area called the Gate. That's where all the helicopters split up and go their separate ways to the individual oil platforms. Bray Alpha is 41 kilometers from the Gate. For much of the journey, the radar operators at Air Traffic Control in Aberdeen will not be able to see them.
The reason why we lose low-level radar coverage out over the North Sea is, in essence, because the Earth is round. As the helicopter's flying outbound to an oil rig, it's actually following the curvature of the Earth.
But radar pulses travel in straight lines, which means that as they travel further and further away, a gap opens up between the surface of the Earth and the radar waves.
If an aircraft flies into that gap, then it'll disappear from radar. In the case of Aberdeen, a helicopter operating about 2,000 feet will disappear into that gap at about 80 miles.
Which is where 56 Charlie is now, over halfway to the oil rigs. From this moment on, no one can see them. 56 Charlie is a Super Puma helicopter serving the North Sea oil platforms off the coast of Britain. It's halfway through a long flight carrying 16 passengers to the Bray Alpha oil rig. But the pilots are getting concerned about what they're seeing on their weather radar. The forecast had been clear skies, but that's not what they're seeing.
What do you think about this cloud?
It's quite thin.
Yeah, but look, we're getting some cumulus too. It's quite small, about 100 yards across.
Yeah, but it's developing a bit.
Cumulus are puffy white clouds, like balls of cotton wool. They're beautiful to look at, and usually harmless. They only last between 5 and 40 minutes. but helicopter pilots prefer to go above them if possible because the air inside and below gets very bumpy.
Let's try to climb above it. Go to 5,000 feet.
Right. Oh, look, there's a line of them. All along the route exactly where we're going.
Yeah, we're not gaining anything by this. Let's drop back down to 3,000 feet.
Right.
So far, the weather is nothing to worry about. But over the North Sea, it can change suddenly. This corner of Europe is where the warm winds from the Atlantic meet the icy blasts from the Arctic and Siberia. The warm water vapor condenses into clouds. Strong winds begin to howl, and the clouds rub against each other, becoming electrically charged, waiting to hurl lightning bolts across the sky. What starts out as a placid day can end up as a violent storm. It's now 1 hour after takeoff, and 56 Charlie is approaching the gate, the point where helicopters begin their descent to the individual oil platforms. They are 41 kilometers from their destination, and the weather is starting to get worse.
Bray traffic, 56 Charlie, 120 miles on the 056 HMR.
They make contact with Bray Traffic Watch, located on one of the oil platforms. It handles all the comings and goings of helicopters. But Bray Traffic doesn't have radar either. It too has to rely on the pilots to tell them where they are.
Would you take the flight watch?
Roger, 56 Charlie, I have your flight watch.
Aberdeen information, Bristow's 56 Charlie at 120 miles. Leaving 3,000 feet, Bray has the flight watch.
Roger, 56 Charlie, continue with Bray traffic.
That is the last message Aberdeen will ever get from 56 Charlie. Quite suddenly, the weather has changed. Instead of the harmless fluffy balls of cotton wool, a line of dangerous cumulonimbus clouds is now blocking their path.
Cumulonimbus, that's the granddaddy of all clouds. It stretches from round about 1,000 feet at its base all the way up to 30,000 feet.
They rise up like huge white mountains, impossible to fly over. Underneath, they are dark and menacing. Pilots seek to avoid them at all costs.
Within a cumulonimbus, you're going to find severe turbulence. You're going to find icing, you're going to find heavy rain, and of course you're going to find lightning. Flying a helicopter, that's not where you want to be.
Lightning is one of the most powerful forces of nature. It strikes somewhere on Earth 100 times every second, with a power of 1 billion volts. However, it's not usually much of a problem for people who fly. On average, commercial aircraft get hit once a year. But their bodies are traditionally made of aluminum, which is a good conductor of electricity. The lightning passes harmlessly along the fuselage and exits from the tail. It's the same for helicopters. Because there are so many Super Pumas operating over the North Sea, they get struck on average 9 times a year, but without any problem. As it begins its descent, Super Puma 56 Charlie enters the line of clouds standing in its path.
Bits of cloud coming up here.
It's okay, it's still green. Let's carry on through that.
Green on the weather radar means there's rain, but it's not heavy enough to worry about.
What the pilot sees in that is it's simply like a television screen. On that television screen he has a map, and overlaid on top of that map is a series of banded colours. If there's no rain, he has a blank map. If there's lots of rain and it's heavy, he has lots of red squares on that, and that gives you an idea of the intensity and the location of the rainfall.
On board 56 Charlie, the weather suddenly takes a turn for the worse.
Hey, where'd this come from?
It's coming in through the vent.
It's like being inside a beanbag swamped by polystyrene balls.
It's so thick. How come the engines are still running? There can't be any air left out there.
No.
Now, another problem.
We've got a hard over on the ice detector.
It's probably just an ice pellet stuck in the probe.
Right.
The helicopter has an ice detector, a probe outside the craft, which is supposed to tell the pilots whether there is ice on the blades. But they think it's become jammed with ice and is giving a false reading. And then, disaster.
Bloody hell.
What was that?
Lightning, I saw it. Oh, this is bad. There's something very, very wrong with this. We'll have to go down, I'm afraid.
The helicopter is badly damaged. The entire body is shaking and vibrating. The crew's first instinct is to get down to a lower altitude in case the worst happens and they fall out of the sky.
Mayday, Mayday, 5-6 Charlie, lightning strike, severe vibration. Mayday, Mayday.
40 kilometers away, another Super Puma helicopter is about to leave a different oil platform. Commander Brian Backhouse is loading passengers onto 5-6 Bravo and preparing to fly back to Aberdeen.
That's everyone. All set.
Suddenly, the loading officer hears Lionel Soul's Mayday call on his radio.
Mayday, Mayday, 5-6 Charlie, lightning strike.
Hear that, Mayday, 56 Charlie!
Gentlemen, my apologies, but we have to disembark you. We have an airborne emergency on a sister aircraft.
Backhouse hurriedly unloads his passengers. He intends to help if he can. Meanwhile, a Force 10 gale is steadily building up, with winds of 100 kilometers per hour. The seas are mounting. Although the pilots of 5-6 Charlie still have control, their chances of making it safely to the oil platform are beginning to fade. The Grampian Freedom is a standby ship, there to give oil workers a way of escaping from the rigs if anything goes wrong. Her skipper, John McInnes, hears the helicopter's distress call.
We increased the speed to full speed ahead. Everybody was informed about the vessel and told to get ready for survivors to be taken aboard.
Back on the Bravo platform, what was a routine flight for Brian Backhouse is about to become a rescue mission. He intends to find the stricken helicopter and nurse it to safety. If it crashes into the sea, he'll direct rescue ships to the spot. But they're not sure where to go.
Let's go to the gate and proceed from there.
They'll start their search at the gate. The Grampian Freedom doesn't know where to go either. They're getting conflicting messages about where 5-6 Charlie is. On the crippled 5-6 Charlie, Captain Roberts briefs the passengers.
Gentlemen, you are obviously aware of the severe vibration. We've had a lightning strike, so please pull up your hoods, zip up your suits, and prepare for a possible ditching.
Countless hours of training are supposed to prepare everyone on board for a moment like this. In a real emergency, how many will remember it?
1,200 feet, we're still flying. Let's try to make it to Bray Alpha and land there.
They're limping towards Bray Alpha platform, now only 11 kilometers away. 3 minutes have passed since the explosion, and things don't seem to be getting any worse.
I'll just try a few small inputs, make sure everything's working. Yes, we've got control in pitch, we've got control in roll, and we've got control in yaw. Tail rotor!
The helicopter is beginning to spin, a sure sign that something's happened to the tail rotor. The only thing the pilots can do to stop the spinning is to switch off the main rotor blade.
Power off, engines off.
Without power, there is no turning back. The helicopter and everyone on board are going to crash into the frigid waves of the North Sea. Helicopter 5-6 Charlie has been hit by lightning and is out of control. It's falling at more than 10 meters a second, with the main rotor acting like a kind of parachute, the blades being turned only by the air that rushes through them.
Mayday, Mayday, tail rotor failure, ditching. Brace for emergency landing.
At this speed, they're about 40 seconds from hitting the North Sea. The other pilots in 5-6 Bravo are searching in vain. There's no sign of 5-6 Charlie in the sky or in the water. Then, they hear another distress call.
Mayday, Mayday, tail rotor failure, ditching.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Relaying for 5-6 Charlie. We have a suspected tail rotor failure. He is ditching.
Captain Backhouse in 5-6 Bravo knows that he's the closest to the stricken helicopter. Everything depends on him. But he's not equipped to locate the distress beacon 5-6 Charlie will use when it ditches. All he can do is search mile after mile of gray sea. Back on the Grampian Freedom, confusion reigns. They've been sent off in another wrong direction. McInnes decides to ignore instructions and play a hunch, heading for where he thinks the helicopter will be.
Floats, floats, I can't find the floats!
I got it! Just keep it at trim angle. Right.
The pilots of 5-6 Charlie are about to attempt one of the most difficult maneuvers, ditching, or landing in the middle of the heaving sea. Floats under the helicopter are meant to keep it from sinking. If they're deployed too soon before touchdown, the chopper may lose what little stability it has and topple over. Too late, and they won't inflate completely. Instead of riding the waves, the helicopter will sink below them. There is no second chance. They time it perfectly.
We're down.
Seems quite stable.
They've landed safely, but no one knows if they will stay afloat. Helicopters are top-heavy. This one could keel over and sink at any moment.
Let's get out of here! Through the door!
They need to get the life rafts out, inflate them, and board them quickly. If the helicopter rolls over, it will trap them all inside.
Lift that end! On the rope!
You go back and help with the evacuation. I'm going to shut things down here. Right. I'm going to try one last mayday call.
But the evacuation doesn't go smoothly. When they throw out the life raft, the strong wind blows it back against the helicopter. They can't get into it.
Can't get this one down. Can we go out the other side? It's better we all stay together anyway. Off you go! Go on! Go on! Go! Go!
Mayday, mayday.
5-6 Charlie. We are on the water, floating, manning the dinghies.
Make room! Make room! Get set! Make room!
The raft is dangerously overloaded. There are 18 on board, and it's only meant for 14. Water is already up to their ankles and rising. For the first time, the pilots are able to see what caused the disaster. The rear rotor blade assembly and gearbox have broken off and are hanging down the side of the helicopter, held on by just a couple of pipes. No one realizes it yet, but in the rush, they've forgotten to bring the distress beacon with them from the helicopter. It sends out a signal that can be picked up by rescuers. Forgetting it could mean the difference between life and death. 2 ropes attach the life raft to the helicopter. They're meant to stop the raft from drifting away. But they'll also drag them down if the helicopter sinks. One of the passengers has a knife.
Shall I cut the line?
No, not yet. We have a better chance of being spotted if we're close to the helicopter.
Problems mount. The passengers are trying to raise the canopy to protect them, but it gets stuck. Without the canopy, they're at the mercy of the waves. The helicopter, once their safe haven, is now their enemy. It's beginning to attack them. When the helicopter doors were jettisoned, they were supposed to slip down into the water and sink. But they're floating on the surface, and one has a jagged edge where it detached from the door frame. It's heading straight for them. The life raft has been punctured by the floating door.
Come on, Bill! Bill, with everything you got, we're gonna sink!
No, don't worry about it. We're not going to sink.
One way, but we're under!
The pilots do their best to put on a brave face.
There are other helicopters and ships out there! They know we're down! They heard our mayday!
The overloaded life raft is getting lower and lower in the water. Inside, it's already waist deep. Now the pounding waves are pushing them beneath the sharp edges of the drooping helicopter blades.
We need to get some distance! We'll have to cut the line!
The 2 safety lines are still tying the life raft to the helicopter, one short, one long. They will cut the short one so they can float further away from the menace of the rotor blades.
The long line's been cut! It's been shredded!
The long line has already been cut. No one knows how.
You'll have to cut the short one!
The short line is the only thing attaching them to the helicopter. If they cut that, they'll quickly drift away, a tiny raft full of men at the mercy of the sea. But if they don't cut it, the jagged edges of the helicopter could tear their life raft to shreds and sink them all. "18 people have scrambled aboard a life raft after their helicopter crashed into the North Sea. The raft is overloaded. It's been punctured by the jagged metal edges of the helicopter and is getting lower and lower in the water. They have to get away from it. First Officer Lionel Soule takes the fateful decision and cuts the rope that ties them to the helicopter. They begin to drift away into the storm. The air temperature is -17 Celsius. The conditions are deadly. Most of the survival suits are leaking freezing water. For a person in the water, hypothermia can begin when the temperatures of air and water added together is below 50 degrees centigrade. In the North Sea in winter, it's likely to be just a fraction of that. Normal muscle and brain functions are quickly affected. The core body temperature will sink, followed by unconsciousness and death. The chances of rescue are slim. No one knows where they are. Just a tiny dot on a vast, turbulent sea.
Quiet! Quiet! I hear something!
There's a helicopter!
The men are desperate. This could be their last chance.
Quickly! Pass me those flares! The flares! In the pocket behind you! Spot a flare, you flying bastard! Here it is! We're over here!
But it's all in vain. The helicopter passes by without seeing them. The men can't believe it. Their only hope is gone. On 5-6 Bravo, Brian Backhouse can only see gray seas. But suddenly his co-pilot spots something.
Contact. Right. 2 o'clock. Okay, Roger. Let's investigate. Target. Contact. Target confirmed. 56 Charlie. Stand by for position report.
Like a guardian angel, 5-6 Bravo hovers directly above the survivors for over an hour, directing rescue boats and aircraft towards this tiny speck in the ocean. First to arrive is the Grampian Freedom. John McInnes's hunch had paid off. Almost 2 kilometers from the raft, the Grampian Freedom launches its fast rescue boat. The boat sets off at full speed to the rescue, but in the heavy swell, the 3-man crew can't see the life raft.
Let's go! Quickly, go!
Their survival training has brought them this far, but no further. They have no idea how they're going to get from this tiny inflatable onto the towering ship in such rough seas.
We reached the standby boat, and you're looking at the hull, a huge steel hull. You said, I'm never going to get up there. But the crews are well trained. They wait for the swell to go up and down in the right motions, and they know exactly when to transfer a passenger onto the deck of the boat, which is very well done in our case.
14 survivors are taken to the Grampian Freedom, 4 to another ship. They're freezing cold and in a state of shock, but otherwise unharmed. Against the odds, Cedric Roberts and Lionel Soule have saved the lives of all on board.
I must admit at the time I did think that was it, we were going to die.
The whole world had changed from being really good to being what I thought was a complete disaster at that time. It was the worst situation I'd ever been in the air, and I was very worried that that was going to be it.
But the day after the crash, they find their account of what caused the accident under question.
Lightning, notionally at least, should not affect a very powerful North Sea helicopter.
This is the first time I can recall a lightning strike having ended up with this kind of conclusion.
The experts are skeptical of the pilot's story. No helicopter has ever crashed into the North Sea before because of lightning. Perhaps there had been some mechanical failure. There are even whispers of pilot error, of recklessly flying into storm clouds. The only evidence to support the pilot's story is now beneath the waves with 5-6 Charlie. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch, Britain's air crash detectives, begin searching for the truth. And this is the vessel they use to do it. It may look like a rig, but the Stay Dive is actually a ship, mostly used for carrying out maintenance work on oil platforms. It has 9 powerful engines, which enable it to stay put in almost any weather. And it carries miniature submarines for underwater exploration. A day after the accident, it's brought in to find and raise the missing helicopter from the bottom of the North Sea. The investigation gets off to a good start. Within a day, the television cameras on board the Stay Dive's 2 submersibles locate what's left of 5-6 Charlie on the seabed. But raising it is a different matter. They carry on working into the night. Soon, several pieces of 5-6 Charlie have been recovered, but still not the vital clue, the missing tail rotor. Ed Trimble was the AAIB's lead investigator.
But the big problem was to recover the tail rotor assembly. Without that, the investigation was literally going nowhere. We knew that the tail rotor assembly had been dangling over the side of the pylon as the helicopter had ditched, and it therefore detached at some point between the ditching and where we had caught up with the main wreckage.
Keeping the Stay Dive going, looking for a needle in the haystack, would cost another $40,000 a day. Ed Trimble calls his boss.
He was fairly skeptical of our chances. He asked what I thought our chances were of finding the tail rotor, and I, being an eternal optimist, I said 80%, to which he replied, I think you'd be very lucky if you've got a 10% chance of recovering the tail rotor assembly in the North Sea.
Ed Trimble stays up all night, relentlessly monitoring the underwater cameras.
I didn't want to be in a situation where we would have missed any evidence of further wreckage, and in particular, any parts of the tail rotor assembly.
Go get yourself a coffee, Eddie.
And by the time 8 o'clock was looming, I decided to go down to the galley to get a coffee. And I couldn't have been away any more than maximum 7 to 10 minutes when I suddenly heard these tremendously excited shouts from our team.
Yes, here we go, we found it!
As I walked in, or ran in, there, smack in the middle of the screen, was the whole of the tail rotor assembly. And even at the first glance, I could see that one of the tail rotor blades showed clear evidence of a lightning strike.
The pilot's account was accurate. The submarine's cameras revealed telltale burn marks on the tail rotor blade. A close look at the wreckage on the deck reveals that 2 of the main rotor blades were also struck by lightning. But it's this tail rotor that suffered the most damage. Since lightning had never forced a helicopter to crash into the North Sea before, the question is, why now? Ed Trimble called in lightning expert John Hardwick to discover just what had hit 5-6 Charlie.
What we wanted to do with this set of tests was to take a set of tail rotor blades from the Super Puma helicopter and subject them to varying energy levels of simulated lightning strikes.
The lightning objectives at Culham basically were to try and reproduce the degree of lightning damage in order to identify what kind of level of energy was associated with this particular strike.
The British Civil Aviation Authority would refuse to accept the evidence of these tests. But Ed Trimble made his own video of them. And as witnesses, he had the Super Puma manufacturers there, too. Hardwick ran the blade through several lightning strikes until he was able to replicate the damage found on the rotor blade. They found they had to go 3 times the maximum allowed by the regulations in order to achieve the same damage. In other words, 3 times a greater lightning strike than anyone believed possible. For one brief instant, 8 millionths of a second, it was more than all the electrical power being consumed in the whole of the United States, some 30 billion watts. And this enormous flash of lightning had happened over the North Sea, where hundreds of thousands of oil workers fly each year.
The helicopters we fly are certified to the highest standards. It's the same as you get on a major airliner flying transatlantic. So we had no reason to believe that any lightning we had encountered would do any severe damage to the helicopter.
Ordinary lightning wouldn't, but this wasn't ordinary.
A lightning strike generates a huge pulse of energy. We can detect these pulses of energy via multiple transmitters and receivers that are situated throughout Europe. The information is calibrated locally, and once the position has been triangulated, that's passed to the Met Office in London.
When the records were examined, they showed something very peculiar. This is what they think happened. Inside cumulonimbus clouds, tiny ice crystals are swept upwards by the wind currents. At the top of the cloud, where it's much colder, they combine with other crystals to form hail. The hail, being heavy, plummets back to Earth. On the way down, it hits the rising water crystals, causing friction. The crystals become electrically charged. When a helicopter enters the cloud, the sharp tips of its whirling rotor blades cut through these crystals, causing more friction, more electricity, until it's all released in a blinding flash. The record showed that the flash which hit 56 Charlie had been the only one over the whole of the North Sea that day, caused almost certainly by the helicopter itself. However, for some reason, nearly all the damage had been confined to the tail rotor. What was it about the tail rotor that had made it especially vulnerable? Then, Ed Trimble made a remarkable discovery. When the Civil Aviation Authority certified the Super Puma as safe, they had missed something important. Something which may have caused 56 Charlie to fall from the sky. Safety investigators examined the wreckage of a helicopter which crash-landed in the North Sea. As they look at it more closely, something becomes very apparent. Back in the 1970s, when the British Civil Aviation Authority laid down the lightning safety standards, they were looking at fiberglass blades, then the normal material for helicopter rotors. But in the 1980s, plane makers began using the new composite materials like carbon fiber, which were lighter and stronger. In particular, they began making the rotor blades out of carbon fiber instead of fiberglass. It was assumed that the same standards would apply equally to the new blades. In the industry, that's known as read-across, and it's very dangerous, because these composite blades brought down 56 Charlie. A composite blade is made of carbon fiber, but has a metal anti-erosion strip glued on to protect the edge. That's where the trouble starts.
Carbon is a conductor of electricity, but it's 1,000 times worse than aluminium, so you get 1,000 times as much heat produced.
The blades get very, very hot, and when the current meets the metal strip running along the edge, there is furious arcing and sparking until finally, part of the erosion strip explodes. As little as 100 grams of the erosion strip flew off, but it was enough. Without its weight, the rear rotor was unbalanced. That's what caused the vibration felt on board 56 Charlie immediately after the lightning strike. 3 minutes later, when Lionel Sole tested out the controls, the unbalanced blades put the tail rotor under enormous stress. The bolts holding it on snapped.
We've lost the tail rotor!
Tail rotor's gone!
We both knew what had happened. We'd lost the tail rotor. And if you don't do exactly the right thing at that point, your life expectancy is very short. It's seconds. We had to do the right thing. We managed to point it into wind, and there was quite a big sea building up. And at 100 feet, I pulled back on the stick to flare the helicopter, slow down its rate of descent, and we were very fortunate at that point. A nice friendly wave came along, and as I leveled the helicopter, a wave came up. We sat on the top of it, and we went down, and it was one of the best landings I've ever done, but that was luck more than judgment.
As bad as it was, it could have been worse. The two hydraulic pipes connecting the assembly to the helicopter did not break. Without the weight of the rotor assembly, the helicopter would have tipped forward and plunged straight into the ocean.
Had that tail rotor gearbox and tail rotor assembly completely separated from the helicopter, then all 18 lives would have been lost because the helicopter would have pitched down irrecoverably and gone into the North Sea.
The investigators found the answer to the mystery of a helicopter crash. But they stumbled across a bigger problem, one that affects every air traveler. Investigators believe that 56 Charlie's violent end was caused by a savage lightning strike, greater than anything it was built to withstand. And when it did, it exposed a problem in the carbon fiber blades that made them vulnerable to lightning. The investigators fear the same thing could happen again, not just to helicopters, but to all planes that use these new materials. Increasingly, aluminum is being replaced with carbon fiber. The world's largest plane, the A380 Airbus, for instance, has over 20%. Its rival from Boeing, the Dreamliner, will be half built from it. What will happen if these planes encounter a monster lightning strike? This was the investigators' biggest concern arising out of this Super Puma accident. But their findings were dismissed. Britain's Civil Aviation Authority refused to demand better lightning protection, saying they did not believe that such a massive lightning strike had occurred over the North Sea.
I thought that the reaction was poor. There seemed to be a real reluctance on their behalf to accept the evidence.
If Britain's air crash detectives are right, there is a real concern facing air travelers. Flashes of lightning far greater than any aircraft believed possible, and aircraft built out of material that cannot handle it. For the Super Puma, though, the lessons have been learned. The rotor blades have been strengthened, and the pilots have been instructed to give storm clouds a wider berth. The men who fly these machines to work are prepared to accept the risks.
Well, I think the morning there we ditched, we were very, very fortunate because the outcome could have gone horribly wrong. But we survived, we got home. My feelings of that morning was this could never happen to me. Now, when I fly in a chopper, especially in the winter time, if it's going to be buffed about with wind, I sometimes get in the back of your mind, this can't happen to me again. But we've all a choice. We've all a choice either to stop or we carry on. And I'm still there 25 years later, still learning a living.
The crash of 56 Charlie was a hair-raising incident that could so easily have ended in tragedy. In the winter of 1995, the skill of Captain Ced Roberts and First Officer Lionel Sole saved the lives of their 16 passengers. Roberts and First Officer Lionel Sole receive an award for their work. The Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators recognized their skill and bravery in the emergency landing.
Although we received a number of awards after the incident from various organisations, one thing I received, which is far more precious to me than any of them, was from the daughters of one of my passengers. It was this little card. It says, "Dear Captain Roberts, I can't tell you how much I need to thank you after you saved my dad's life. It took a lot of effort to try to keep calm while you were falling. If you hadn't have got that helicopter in control, my dad maybe wouldn't be here today. Thank you very, very, very much."
These men work in one of the most hostile places on Earth. They risk their lives just getting there. Today, their worst fears come true. Their helicopter is plunging toward the frigid North Sea. They're far from land, off the radar screens. No one knows where they are.
Mayday, Mayday, 5-6 Charlie.
The next few seconds will decide who lives and who dies. The cause of the crash is hidden in its tangled wreck. These helicopters are built to handle the roughest conditions. What went wrong? The answer affects everyone who flies.
We're not getting any oxygen. We have the terrain alarm. Aero crew 603. We are in an emergency.
January 19th, 1995. Captain Ced Roberts and First Officer Lionel Sole work for Bristow Helicopters in Aberdeen, Scotland. Their job is to ferry workers out to the oil platforms off the coast of Scotland. By mid-morning, they've completed one trip and are getting ready to head back out. Their helicopter is Super Puma 5-6 Charlie. While it's being checked out and refueled, First Officer Sole reviews the flight logs, and Captain Roberts goes through the weather reports, which are updated every 2 hours.
Oh, weather's okay. Good for January.
This is where they're heading. The need for oil drives men to some of the most unpleasant places on Earth. This is one of them. The North Sea divides Britain from mainland Europe. It's a shallow sea, so the cruel winds that race across it can whip up enormous waves. The sea is cold, gray, and violent.